Okay, good afternoon everyone. There was a dispute. Every now and again you get a phone call that you know is going to be all absorbing for weeks and weeks and weeks, and everything else you're doing has to be put aside. It's normally because the solicitor's left it to the last minute. But I got this phone call, and I'm going to concentrate on this case today because I think it's important for us all in the room to appreciate that actually one day someone could come knocking on our door as consultants, as contractors. In this case, the landlord suddenly gets an unwelcome attention, shall we say, from a tenant. The tenant occupies a number of floors. I can't tell you the building. The tenant occupies a number of floors in a large building. And the tenant says, actually, we've been suffering for about 5 years with issues with lifts breaking down, and there were other things as well, but the lifts were the principal discussion. So, this is going to be interesting. So, solicitor says, are you up for it? Can you help us? Yeah, no problem at all. You need to know the tenant wants £20 million back. So, it's going to be interesting. So, then, wadges of papers arrive. So, as I said, all absorbing, just sitting there in my office, reading and reading and reading. So, when we had a look at what the claimant side was saying, and you can see breakdowns here from 2008 through to 2015. The claimant said in 2008 there was 96 breakdowns, so that's 13.7 per lift. Yeah, that's pretty high, isn't it? Let's be fair. Yeah. So, and it rose to 2012. You can see there we've got 206 breakdowns, so nearly 30 breakdowns per lift per year. Yeah. So you start thinking, not sure the landlord's got far to go with this. This is interesting. So then we started going through all of the claims, each individual breakdown, and started looking at it. So if you look at 2012, when we chopped it away, we got it down to, actually, we think there's only 132 breakdowns, which is still high at 18.9, and 21.6 per lift in 2011. It's still high, it's not right, but it's nowhere near. It's like when you get divorced, isn't it? It's, I'm sure we've all been there. I knew it was bad, but I didn't think it was that bad, and that's what we came to. So we thought, well, we need to have a look at what's actually going on. And this is why the tenant was really upset, and it was because the chief exec had been trapped twice in a lift. So then we started mapping that out, and in fact the worst year was 2008, when they had 35 entrapments in 1 year. So, yeah, tenants got something to complain about here. And you can see that dropped off. There was a stabilisation project in 2015-16. So we started trying to categorise what was going on. So the breakdowns requiring parts or a repair. You can see from 2008 onwards, it ramped up till 2011, and then it started dropping off again. Minor maintenance. You can see out of all of those breakdowns, the 699 that we identified, 278 of them were minor maintenance issues, mostly door problems. Yeah, but still very high. Misuse was only 10. So the immediate thought was, yeah, someone must be doing a bit of vandalism, but no. No fault found running on arrival was 43. And the fault not detailed, and that's because of a lack of detail in the maintenance operatives reports, was 171. So quite a high percentage because of a lack of information, where you couldn't say either way what the issue was. The minor maintenance includes resets after power failures as well. I'll point that out. So what's acceptable? So I went off looking, is there anything published about what is an acceptable number of breakdowns? And the only thing I could find is in this book, where it says, repeated problems frequently are caused by improper maintenance. The frequency of callbacks may be a sign of improper maintenance. In general, the average number of annual callbacks that many companies consider acceptable is 2 for escalators, 3 for hydraulic elevators, and 4 for the more demanding traction type elevators. More callbacks per year, you can see it's American, more callbacks per year than those numbers are usually considered excessive, and the reasons for the callbacks should be investigated. So 4 call-outs a year on a traction lift, and at times this building was hitting 30, with our analysis. And it went on to say, the importance of monitoring callbacks as a standard for measuring maintenance performance cannot be overemphasised. Therefore, it's essential that proper maintenance records be maintained. And again, that's where there is a weakness. I find it really interesting that we don't actually train maintenance operatives how to fill out forms. And some of the cases I see, you think, wow, the maintenance operative went way above the call of duty to get this lift back in service on a Saturday. It was a call out. And what they could have done was made safe and gone home. They found a short on a training flex or something. And then they'll write something really stupid on the maintenance in the log card, which is disclosable in evidence. I remember a case where they said, that was a not very good Saturday, but it was more descriptive than that. So when we got to the facts of this building, it was more or less occupied to double what it was designed to be occupied at. So that in itself was interesting. And as a result, the building couldn't cope with everyone being evacuated and then trying to get everyone back in the afternoon. And there was a standing instruction that if the fire alarm went off after 2 in the afternoon, you were to go home. You don't need Monte Carlo simulation to work out what time the fire alarms used to go off. Yeah? So it was all very interesting. And then started to think about the life cycle phase. As it happens, these lifts were in phase 3. So long life items were wearing out and they were in their twilight years, we say. But if you go back to that book that said 4 breakdowns, who would agree with that? Any go on, Gabriel? For nearly new equipment, okay. But would we not accept in phase 1 the earlier you get a few problems and then it settles down? Yeah? Anyone think 4's too high, too low? 2? You think it's too high? Interesting. Then we looked at the components that were failing. Mean time to failure is established by testing a number of similar components until they fail. So essentially, you life cycle them. When they fail, that's your mean time to failure. But in our industry, we wait till things break down, don't we? Yeah, mostly. The mean time between failures is established by dividing the time between failures by the number of failures. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Most people will know this case. There was a brake failure on a lift in London, and the lift kept driving through the brake. The VF drive was strong enough to drive it through in the upper reaches of the shaft. The controller was about 17 years old. When we got into the nitty-gritty, and what had caused the problem was a problem with the brake contactor. When we got into it and we spoke to the contactor, and the lady was killed in this incident. When we got into talking to the contactor manufacturer, they said, well, we only guarantee them for 1 million operations. Yeah, how many do you reckon it's done? Well, we reckon that lift could have made 960 starts a day, just using a rule of thumb. It's 20 stories in a high-rise residential block, 2 lifts in the block and 6 dwellings on each floor. So it's not unreasonable to think it did that sort of level work, because that's the way it is. And I've not put anything in there for visitors and postmen and milkmen and whatever. So we only guarantee our contactor for 1 million operations, but we reckon it's done loads more than that. But we don't go out there, do we, and change contactors on a regular basis. We just wait for them to pack up. So here we go. So I think it'd be useful if we did have journey counters on every controller these days. and a maintenance regime that said when we should replace stuff. So then I got into, well, actually, what's a breakdown? Are we talking total breakdown, or are we talking depleted service? You know, safety edge is packed up, the doors might go into nudging on every floor, but the lift's still running. So there's two types of breakdown we looked at as well. And then we had a conversation about the stuff that has to come out, the stuff that isn't breakdowns. So vandalism where appropriate equipment has been installed. You can't manage that, can you? Power cuts. And there were a few power cuts in this particular building. Card reader failure, security. Joachim yesterday was talking about the card system there. If you get a failure on that system, I mean, that could cause huge difficulties with those lifts, aren't they, in Amsterdam? Is that a lift problem? Not really, but it's a problem for the tenants. Grounding as a result of fire alarm inputs. As I say, it was common that the fire alarm went off in the afternoon. I think if we'd done some more analysis to find out who was playing football that night, we would have identified what team they supported as well. But lift left on car preference control. That was quite a common one. Obstruction in the door track, where someone just makes a phone call to the lift company, lift's not working. What's actually happened is there's something in the track. So in simple terms, a breakdown where the causation of the breakdown is as a result of an external influence that need to come out. And that's what we took out of that pile. In addition, call-outs labelled as working on arrival should be removed from the equation because you can't provide any substantive evidence to that, but you need to be logging that it's going on. So when you get to this point, the maintenance contractor should start thinking. And in this case, the maintenance contractor didn't start thinking. Is the equipment installed appropriate for the location? You know, if we've got a reason to go to the client and say, this is why we're having trouble. What's the age of the equipment installed? You know, and is the equipment obsolete? Are we having breakdowns because the stuff's old, obsolete, we can't get replacement parts? Are the breakdowns being caused by a single or multiple cause? Does the location suffer from misuse? Clearly, in this case, it didn't. But there are locations where you will get high amount of misuse. Social housing is classic. Why they vandalise the thing that gets them to their dwelling, I don't know. But that is a fact. Is the number of breakdowns high due to a single issue that hasn't properly been diagnosed or rectified? Now, very often that's an intermittent fault, isn't it? Is the maintenance operative suitably skilled for the task stroke equipment? That's a big question, isn't it? Yeah, are we sending the right person to sort this out? And is technician support provided in an appropriate and timely manner? Okay, they're all questions that I think the maintenance contractor should be asking themselves. The owner should be asking themselves some questions as well. They shouldn't just be going, it's your fault, Mr. Maintenance Contractor. Is the maintenance contractor appropriate for the equipment installed? That's interesting stuff, isn't it? And we could debate whether the original provider and installer of the equipment should be the maintainer for life. Is the maintenance operative suitably trained? Are breakdowns escalated to a more appropriate technician when required? You know, do I get responsiveness, or do I just keep getting the same person come along and not getting to the bottom of it? Is the type of maintenance contract suitable? Has an agreed causation of the breakdown analysis been undertaken? Like the analysis we undertook, is someone actually looking at what's really going on? Does the location suffer from misuse? That's a generic one. And how can the analysis and information be taken forward? So, let's have a bit of fun. This is my interpretation. This is purely hypothetical, this one. The claimant says 5 call-outs here. Lift found on car preference. Who thinks that's a call-out? Who thinks that should be taken out of the equation, or is that a breakdown? It's caused by the operator, isn't it? That's not a lift contractor's problem, is it? So I've said, no, I don't think that is. Another interesting one, lift company gets called out 3 times, and what they find is actually the lift that's not working is actually on energy saving mode. It's shut down. Yeah, Well, clearly that's not a breakdown, is it? But the claimant says 3. Lift clipped a lock 3 days in succession and self-restarted, but the tenant hadn't called the maintenance contractor. Yeah, so, okay, 3 days on the trot he did it, but I would suggest that's only one breakdown. Personally, I don't think you can blame the lift contractor for the fact that he's done it 3 times and that it's taken 3 times for them to make a phone call. Lift clipped a lock 3 days in succession and stopped. The contractor was called in after each breakdown. That's fair game, isn't it? Power cut. Again, that can't be as a result of, what can you do? You've run out of fuel, haven't you? It's not a lift problem. Safety edge vandalised. I've said no there, and you could discuss that, couldn't you, about where the safety edge is, what type of safety edge is, what appropriate. This is the one where I think we might have a debate. The lift crash stopped 5 times in a month, but wasn't diagnosed until the break in the trailing flex conductor became a permanent break. It was making up, crash stopping, making up again and getting it going again. Claimant says 5 breakdowns. I've said 1. We could debate this, can we? What do you reckon?
No.
Come on, Bob, you're shaking your head. How many?
If there's a malfunction of the lift,
Yep.
and I've attended 5 call-outs,
Yep.
it's 5 call-outs,
Okay.
because they haven't rectified it.
Okay. And what about the car lights not working? No. Okay, fine. So we're still miles apart, aren't we? The claimant says 28 breakdowns. I've said 5. You said 9, Bob. Yeah. But that's the truth of the matter, and that is what this landlord faced. That sort of scenario. So I've taken some hypothetical ones there for a bit of a debate. So, conclusions. I don't think a standard number of breakdowns per annum is an appropriate way of measuring the need for modernisation or replacement, because it could have happened in phase 1 of the life of that lift. You've just put it in and you've had a few breakdowns. It's exceeded 4. You're not going to modernise it, are you? You're going to deal with it. It may, however, alert an owner or a maintenance contractor to the fact that problems exist. What I find interesting as well, it was on a full comp contract. Why is the maintenance contractor not going, actually, this is costing us a few bob, let's have a look at it? Yeah. Over and above this, it might be more appropriate to say the acceptable number of breakdowns is X on the basis that appropriate equipment is installed. How many of us know buildings where the equipment is not right for that building? So I don't think you can just say 4 breakdowns. I was involved in the writing of that book, by the way. I'm criticising our own work here. Discussion is required as to an appropriate level of breakdowns based on the location. What's acceptable in one building may not be acceptable in another. Reliability is just as important as a design based on traffic analysis. I've slid that in there. A colleague of mine was going to do a talk about this. But I think reliability is just as important as traffic analysis. You can do all the witchcraft side of the business, but you've got to keep them going. Detailed reporting of breakdowns by the maintenance contractor is a must to allow the adequate analysis to be undertaken. Tenants are seeing the opportunity to claim against contractors and or building owners for poor performance. We need to wake up to that. It's the author's opinion that only a true picture of breakdowns versus call-outs has been established, and I say breakdowns and call-outs, that a discussion can be had as to whether modernisation or replacement is appropriate. I don't think you can say it's breaking down the lot, it's time to modernise. The paper was intended to start a debate because no one's covered this before in the symposiums, but the legal side of this is real. People are getting, tenants are coming after people, and it's our industry. Thank you, Len.